Right. I'm going fucking insane. I've just been like pacing around my flat trying to figure this shit out. I think I know what I'm going to do next, and it's not what I was talking about, but it's related. I'll try to explain my thought process. So I've been thinking about the instrument. One of the things that I wanted to do early on. Let me just give a very sort of vague overview. So everything in Blockhead currently it doesn't work the way normal audio software works, where um, normal audio software you like create an instrument, or you would either create like this effect device which would be added to the end of a track, basically in like a rack, or you create this an instrument device, and then you trigger the instrument. The instrument device is just always on, and then you trigger it via MIDI events. Um, so that's the reason we don't have MIDI yet in Blockhead, is because Blockhead just doesn't work on that paradigm. Like there's no such thing as these device things. There's no like virtual environment of like MIDI cables, which is how all audio software works. Very sensible way of designing audio software. Makes perfect sense that everything up until this point, that's generally how audio software works, because it's a very neat idea and it works really well, and that's essentially why I'm an idiot for not doing things that way. Um, anyway, so when it comes to like shoehorning that sort of thing into Blockhead so that you can have all the joys of MIDI performance and that kind of thing. An idea that I've had for a long time for this stuff is there's going to be some kind of MIDI block, which represents an on-off event. So it would be similar like to the kind of block that you see in a typical piano roll, and it would look, I guess, pretty similar to what we have, the meta block that we have at the moment, where you would create imagine this is this hypothetical MIDI block. This left edge would be the note on event, and the right edge would be the note off event. And then the block would have a pitch associated with it. So this is basically like how MIDI on off events happen in. It's how it works in like tracker style DAWs, which is largely like big secret. Don't tell anybody. But Blockhead is just a tracker in disguise. um, So in a tracker, you have like a track with like lanes, and but the lanes don't represent pitch like they do in a piano roll. So you could just create like MIDI events anywhere, and each MIDI event has a pitch associated with it, but their like vertical position doesn't have anything to do with pitch. Um, so that's all fine. So I'm gonna have that's gonna be one way of triggering these instrument things. Um, okay, so the other thing you'd be able to do is like just create an instrument, which and then these MIDI blocks would be like set up to point towards one of these instruments that you create, um, and then their position within the track would determine the position that the instrument is sort of instantiated in. So it would all interact with like the way that the Blockhead effect system works at the moment, where you can have like these effects that just sort of exist momentarily within the timeline, and it would all be routed into the correct place. Another idea that I've had for a long time, which I just has always just sort of made sense to me, is um, these instrument things that we're creating. They would either be backed by one of these blocks, um, which would play out its like modulation up until the end, and then the lifetime would be extended, so we'd be able to add like release periods for these blocks as well, if we want to. Um, so the lifetime of the block would be sort of invisibly extended. You'd be able to hear it, but it wouldn't be like visible. It would be extended to the lifetime of the instrument trigger, including the release period. However, we want to deal with release periods. But we have other types of block other than like samplers and synths. We have these effect blocks. So the idea would be like similar to there's a thing called the Finger. The Tim Exile's the Finger, a Native Instruments thing, where you can assign a bunch of different effects to MIDI keys, and then trigger them off. It's like a multi-effects unit, but you'll be able to like in Blockhead, you'd be able to use these effect blocks as instruments essentially, and so you'd be able to select like the lane where you want to be like dynamically inserting these effects, and you could trigger them off while the song is playing back. And you could do the same thing with like traditional instruments like synth instruments and sampler instruments as well. Yes. And so then I started thinking about potential VST support in the future. This is just like where my mind started to wander. When it comes to triggering VST instruments, we would not be able to do what I'm describing there, where you would trigger an instrument, say on this lane, for example, and have the output of the instrument routed into the effects on the lane below. That's only possible. That's only going to be possible with like the native Blockhead instrument system. But when it comes to VST instruments, that's not going to be possible. Because of the way the audio routing happens in Blockhead. I have to do a lot of sneaky and clever things behind the scene, which ideally the user doesn't have to think about. But there's a lot of black magic going on to achieve what Blockhead does. I mean, technically, I could take the output of a VST instrument and route it into the song effects, but it's making it sound good in all situations would be, I think, not possible, because of the way that it's basically it all comes down to the way the black magic that Blockhead does to avoid like clicking and artifacts when the song is playing back and the user is like editing things and moving things around, and at the same time like the playback can rewind to an earlier point if you loop back here. If you loop back to an earlier point, basically there's a lot of like automatic crossfading happening where there's like multiple copies of the same sort of, there's like multiple copies of the project in memory, and Blockhead is like the audio engine is like automatically crossfading between these different versions of the project to avoid clicking artifacts when we're editing things. And so the way that system works, I wouldn't be able to just like I wouldn't be able to route the output of a VST or some other plugin format instrument into the middle of a track like that, like I'm describing. So with the native instrument system that I want to add, that would be possible, and that would be like part of the joy of Blockhead's instrument system would be the ability to like live trigger instruments and have them affected by the effect blocks at whatever point in the track you insert them, and also like live trigger effects if you want to do that. Live trigger effects on specific lanes, and it would be like they're being dynamically inserted into the song at runtime. So that's not possible with VST or whatever like third-party plugin system. But what I can do, obviously, is just have VSTs work the same way they do in every DAW, which is you essentially assign a VST instrument to, well, a VST instrument will play on one track at a time, and it will be routed into an effects rack that exists at the bottom of the track, at the end of the track. So at the moment, Blockhead does not have an effects rack at the end of each track. There's no concept of rack-based effects. We only have these momentary effects that start and end and exist at a certain point in time, and like they exist from here to here, and then they stop existing, at least audibly. But that's always been just like a background thought, is that I would probably add a way for these effect plugins to work in a rack-based context, and then add the option to just have a traditional style effect rack at the end of each track in Blockhead. Because sometimes, also that solves a bunch of like mixing and mastering issues, which at the moment is like not a focus in Blockhead. Like I just haven't thought. I just haven't been focusing on like mixing and mastering. I acknowledge, very important thing in audio software, and Blockhead is just not at the moment cut out for that. And part of the reason is there's no sane way of like presenting an EQing interface, for example. That would be one big thing, because we don't have rack-based effects. But as soon as we have a rack-based effect system, suddenly you can just add either VST effects or these blink effects. I would update to be able to work in a rack-based context. And then you could add like a proper EQing interface, for example. There's also all kinds of audio effects which I think make a lot more sense as in like the traditional way that those kinds of effects are presented. So I think that's what I'm going to work on next. I've decided is to add a rack-based effect system to Blockhead. So each track you'll be able to add, I don't know what the interface is going to look like yet, but you'll be able to add a rack of effects at the end of each track. So they're not going to be like momentary effects like these things. But yeah, an early thought I had was you'd be able to just select one of these effects and say like auto extend all infinitely to the right and auto extend infinitely to the left. But I don't think that's actually a good idea. I don't think that's coherent with the rest of the way Blockhead works. I think it makes a lot more sense to just add a traditional style of effect rack to the end of the tracks, and then that solves the problem of like how do you route a VST instrument into an effect, for example, or a rack of a series of effects. I guess at that point, then I have to create a whole auxiliary bus system and all that kind of thing as well. But that's the kind of stuff that I think that kind of thing is actually, yeah, when it comes to like the world of mixing and mastering, that's not the kind of thing that I've that interested in like innovating that much. My ideas have always been like based on arrangement and editing workflow, that kind of thing. I don't want to start rocking the boat when it comes to like mixing and mastering, because I think that's sort of figured out in the industry properly. I don't think I have much new to bring to the table there. So yeah, an effect-based rack-based effect system. Excuse me. Makes sense. How many times am I going to say that phrase? I'm just trying to. So did I communicate everything that I was trying to communicate there? Yeah. So the idea always was, um, like, yes, of course, we're going to support VSTs in Blockhead, but the idea has always been like that they're not going to be like first class citizens because the VST paradigm just didn't work with what Blockhead is doing. So then it's not going to be involved in this like the you're not going to get like the power of the Blockhead arrangement and editing system and have VST instruments and effects work within it at the same time. I just don't see, I don't see how that's possible, either technically or design wise. So that was something I always said though. That's not something that I'm just deciding now. That's just something that I've always just thought. However I end up adding VST support, they're not going to be like, it's not going to integrate properly with the way everything else does. But I think that would be a nice compromise. So just instruments, you can trigger an instrument on a track, basically, not on a specific lane. And the VST instrument would be routed down to the bottom of the track and go into the effect rack along with the rest of the track content and just mix it together. That should work, I think, technically. All right, bye bye.